Several key universities in the western part of the United States have begun admitting students based on their class rank over certain academic characteristics that they grant throughout high school. This has stemmed several questions in the academic world, including are these high school qualities even worth teaching? This is an analysis of a paper by Sandra E. Black, Jane Arnold Lincove, Jenna Colnan, and Rachel Vernon, done by myself, Kevin Hines. So a little bit of background on the paper. It's about a study done inside of the University of Texas Austin, which has begun implementing a 10% rule for automatic admissions. What this rule states is if you have two students who have very similar backgrounds, we'll call it Sally and Bob. On the left you have Sally, who has a 2.5 GPA, a 1000 on her SAT, and she's in the top 15% of her class rank, all of which are pretty normal statistics except for the class rank part. I did fudge that a little. And then on the right, you have Bob, who has a 2.4 GPA and 900 on the SAT. However, Bob goes to a school that tends to attract more of a struggling student base, so his characteristics place him in the top 5% class rank. Class rank is based on GPA in most scenarios, including this one. So with this top 10% rule, Sally would not be admitted into this college based on her class rank, nor her academic performance. However, Bob would be. So it disregards the GPA and the SAT, and as long as the top 10% or less class rank exists, the student is automatically admitted. This little graph shows which of the following states have a major university that has a automatic admissions rule, and as you can see, it breaks out to roughly 40% of the United States, and over the past couple of years it's only been growing, so more and more schools are picking this up. The main point of opening up a 10% or any class rank admissions policy is that it diversifies the school's body more, because instead of having struggling schools not be able to get any student into the major university, anyone can make it based on their high school rank. In this study alone, the University of Texas at Austin began with only 616 schools feeding into its university, and over a 5-year period has increased that number to 700 public schools. The main hypothesis is that if these high school characteristics don't matter as strongly, the 10% of students who are automatically admitted from their class rank, the 10% students wouldn't be suffering as bad as the traditional academic only. So there's two types of data sets that are being used in this study. There's the high school data along with the college data. High school data is broken down into 4 main characteristics. You have their class rank, the grade point average, some data from the high school, which we'll get into a little bit more in depth later, and the Academic Excellence Indicator System, which is the AEIS. For the college, we've used 3 different data sources. We have the admissions data, financial data, and then register data. To break down the admissions data for the college students a little bit more, this grants us things such as high school rank, the student's SAT scores, some of the demographics of the student, so some identifying characteristics about them such as race, mother's income, household income, parents' college, stuff like that, along with some other categorical data. Financial aid is pulled directly from FAFSA, which is available to be used in studies like this, and this shows us things such as the parents' income, household income, what the parents do, how long the parents have done it, and all of that stuff. Then we have the register data, which is showing us the college GPA over time, so we can see if these characteristics are a one-time thing or if they actually benefit the student over a long period of time. It also shows us the courses that have been completed by the student, the courses they've enrolled in, and the GPA for each credit, or for each class. This study is only looking at classes that are worth 4 credits or more, so that will rule out some basic electives along with lab classes. The main idea is that this high school data will be able to go on to predict college GPA. First, we're going to dig into the data a little bit. First thing we're going to break down is the freshman class of UTA versus the Austin based on race. One of the big differences is about a 7-point difference between the white population in both the freshman class and the Austin races total. The freshman class at Austin has about 7% less white people than the entire race breakdown of Austin, and it makes up for that in about a 5% increase in Hispanic individuals. Up next, we're going to be comparing the 10%, also known as the automatic admissions, to those that were admitted traditionally. So as we can see, the traditional admissions race breakdown is very heavily weighted towards white individuals. The traditional rates are how most people get into college. It's your GPAs, your SAT, your admission letters, all of that stuff. while the automatic admission solely is looking at your class rank. So for example, 51.2% of the people that got in solely because of their class rank were white, and as the original hypothesis shows, this does diversify the schools more, because you're getting more students that are in struggling schools that are obtaining entry into these universities solely based on their class rank. So there's more Hispanic people that are introduced into automatic admissions than there are in normal traditional ways. One of the biggest differences between the automatic students and the traditional students comes from the form of household income. As we can see comparing the left and the right graphs, automatic students are more likely to come from a household that makes less than $20,000 a year, while the traditional students are more likely to be making more than $80,000 a year. In order to better test the hypothesis, this study used 3 separate models, but the same data. The first model didn't include any individual characteristics of the students. The second model included individual characteristics along with character development and the high school class rank, and the third model included SAT scores. The study goes on to say that the SAT scores was a bit of an over-control on their part because most schools that are going to be providing a high level of learning are already going to be accounting for the SAT scores. So schools that are prepping their students for SAT scores are more likely to score better on SATs. If we break down the coefficients of each of the 3 models and see which one's the strongest and which one's the weakest, they both share the top 1 and bottom 2. All 3 models show that special education is most likely to impact a student's GPA. District size and teacher experience are most likely to show little to no influence. The second strongest coefficient for the first model, which does not include high school characteristics, ranks free and reduced lunch very highly, while Model 2 and Model 3 decide to sub in mobility. And mobility just is the percent of students who transfer in or out from a different high school. The results. Looking through using the high school characteristics as predictors for other high school predictors, we find 2 very heteroscedastic variables. The free and reduced lunch is very likely to go to a black, older person coming from a low income, and the mothers that did not attend college are very likely to come from a Hispanic school that have very low pupil per funding. However, there's also 3 homoscedastic variables, and these are special education, teacher's experience, and SAT tested. These have no correlation with any of the other variables. One of the biggest issues with this paper was it was addressing the decay effect. So they were wondering if these high school qualities would impact a freshman just as much as they would be impacting the sophomores and juniors. One of the biggest struggles to testing this is about 15% of the automatic admissions students dropped out of college before they could even test this data. However, they were able to still add some decay coefficients. All 9 of the coefficients decayed over the 3 years of the student's time. Certain things decayed at a quicker rate based on the year they were in. However, all 3 showed a natural decay over time. As we can see, special education began with a very strong negative coefficient. It still ended up with a negative coefficient by the time that the student was a junior. However, it did weaken a lot. Things like district size, teacher experience were already had a very small coefficient, did decrease as well. SAT also went down. Things such as the mobility and the influence of race and free and reduced lunch also weakened over time for each student. Overall, the study found that high school characteristics do affect student performance, and these effects seem to be more pronounced in low-income students. There is very little evidence that the effects of high school characteristics do decay over time. Even though there was a slight decay, it wasn't very strong. These 10% in automatic admissions do increase the overall diversity of the students. It shows that the students were very well prepared for school, regardless of what their college or their high school GPA and SAT scores were. And it also increased the feeder schools limit, so more students were getting an opportunity to go to these universities. This paper wasn't perfect, and there were a few critiques and possible data points that make it a little hard to come to the conclusions that it did. We'll address those now. First, it broke down the sample a lot. It had to remove a lot of samples. It started off looking at all freshmen who were admitted to the University of Texas at Austin, which was 49,575. Of those 49,575, several thousand of them had incomplete data on their high school records, which made it impossible for them to be studied against, and that decreased the records down to 27,392. Of those 23,392, we have 15% of those that ended up dropping out, leaving us with 23,000 411. The 23,411 students that ended up being studied here only make up 47% of the original data pool. It's very hard to come to conclusions when over half the data isn't usable. GPA also is greatly used in the study to determine whether or not the high school characteristics were impacted. However, there's also a lot of non-observable GPA influencers that the paper just wasn't able to take into effect, such as the social characteristics of the students, whether or not they go out to parties often, whether or not they're on some extra clubs, some football teams, such as that. If they join more clubs, if they're working, there's a lot of things that can also be impacting the student's time, which in turn would be impacting their GPA. And finally, there was no real way for it to determine which camp students were in. For example, you could have a student that is in the top 2% of their school, but would also be being admitted solely based on their GPA and their SAT scores, regardless of their class rank. So it's really hard for them to split those up into certain camps. The 10% club can almost exclusively be broken up because you can just see those that wouldn't have made it in based on their academic performance, while the traditional also can encompass those of the 10%. Thank you.